Good afternoon, and thank you to the committee for the honor of presenting this really important award. The Ridenhour Prize for Truth-Telling honors individuals who put the fidelity of truth ahead of their own interests. And this year our recipients are Dr. Scott Allen, Dr. Pamela McPherson, and Scott Schuchart for their role as Department of Homeland Security whistleblowers challenging the whole notion of family separation at the United States southern border. The committee who selected Dr. McPherson, Dr. Allen, and Mr. Schuchart came very upfront and said, unlike times since Watergate, we need whistleblowers. We need people who are going to look the truth in the eye and say, this is what's happening, and it's wrong, and we need to do something about it. And this is the role that these Ridenhour Prize winners have for today. Scott Allen and Pamela McPherson are both physicians. They work as subject matter experts for the Department of Homeland Security Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. And in their role as physicians monitoring what was going on, they saw families being separated at the border. They saw some of the other abuses happening to young children at the southern US border. And in their role, they did, as Pam McPherson said to me, answer the question, do you want to write a letter or do you want to make a difference? And they decided to make the difference. They exposed these practices to the to the Senate whistleblowing caucus, and were able to get the point across that these things were happening. Scott Schuchart was an attorney for the Department of Homeland Security Office of Civil Liberties and Civil Rights, and he wound up, because of what he saw, speaking out and resigning his position, and gave up his job, his livelihood, because he needed to speak the truth for these children. And what happened then was really where I came into play in the American Academy of Pediatrics, because our doctors at the southern border were telling us the same thing. Families were being separated, these abuses were happening. And it caused us to go down and see what was going on. And I'll never forget the time I walked into an Office of Refugee Resettlement tender age shelter. This is where they kept the young children, the 12 years and under children. And I walked into the room of toddlers. And if any of you have ever been in a room with toddlers, you know that they're rambunctious and you know that they're noisy. And this room was quiet, except for one little girl who couldn't have been more than 18 months old, who was just sobbing and beating the ground with her little fists and couldn't be consoled because no one was allowed to hold these children. They weren't allowed to pick them up or comfort them. And I saw one little 2-year-old who had a piece of paper in her hand, and that piece of paper had the names of pro bono attorneys that she could contact if she wanted some representation. Seriously. I mean, if that's not child abuse, what is? When we saw this, we had to speak out as a nonprofit organization who is dedicated to the health of children. And we were able to go to the Los Angeles Times and tell them that we knew that separation of parents and kids centuries ago, decades ago, was a bad idea. But because of what we know of the science of neuromodulation of stress hormones, and we know that when you take a child away from a parent, that unmitigated fight or flight hormones actually causes brain damage, we could call this government-sanctioned child abuse. And the response to that was enormous. Thank you. We had people from Oprah Winfrey to Laura Bush come out and condemn the family separation policy, and it drove the president 5 days later to rescind that policy. And we no longer have that zero tolerance policy as something that's public. We do, however, still have our challenges. And we continue to have challenges, and we continue to address them. And it is the truth tellers who are able to bring things to light so the rest of us in our community can make this public and make it important and have us focus on the values of human rights that are most important. And because of the bravery of Dr. Scott Allen, Dr. Pamela McPherson, and Mr. Scott Schuchart. We will work together on this, and we're doing this because you never stood down, and you never gave in, and you never gave up. And together, we never will. So let's congratulate the 2019 Ridenhour Prize winners for truth-telling. Dr. Scott Allen, Dr. Pamela McPherson, and Mr. Scott Schuchart.